The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is a title that I adore. Yes, it's a bit different from other Zelda games, but different isn't bad. I like different. Hell, I'm different, and I think it's an amazing game that unfortunately is overlooked far too often, or at least I think so.
While The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, it's certainly in a different color, or rather a different palette. Although Majora's Mask isn't the best Zelda title, it's certainly not the worst. In fact, I really like Majora's Mask. It's fun, challenging, and an overall amazing game.
But did you know that Majora's Mask was born out of a lack of will to work on Ocarina of Time's would-be expansion, Zelda?
But did you know Majora's Mask was only developed in 18 months by the dungeon designer of Ocarina of Time?
Well, today on Gaming Mysteries, I'll be talking about the beta of Majora's Mask.
Well, on this episode of Beta64, I'm going to talk about just that.
Aonuma felt that Zelda wasn't a very progressive title.
Eiji Onuma, Zelda Gaiden's dungeon designer, was not impressed though. He felt like he was just remaking Ocarina of Time again.
It's been labeled by Miyamoto as a parody of Ocarina of Time, and it was to boast remixed dungeons, which we saw in Master Quest, but also new quests, new dungeons, and a slew of other rumored goodness.
While Zelda was to add remixed and harder dungeons along with new enemies and other goodies.
If I'm to understand correctly, it wasn't really supposed to be its own standalone title. It was supposed to be an add-on, so it's to be expected that it might not be the most progressive thing ever.
Which it kinda should be, because it's an expansion.
He still wanted to create a new Zelda game, so Aonuma bargained with Miyamoto that if he could make a new Zelda game within a year, that they wouldn't have to make Zelda.
When Aonuma complained to Miyamoto, Miyamoto challenged him to create a new Zelda installment, but in only 1 year. Aonuma agreed to the proposal and got to work.
Said that the title held 64 disk drive origins, that it at one point was to take full advantage of the hardware.
Because Zelda Gaiden was developed for the 64 disk drive, it was to exploit many of the features to come with it.
In particular, the internal clock, as it said that in the game's early stages, while it allegedly still took advantage of the 64DD, that there were 7 days in the game instead of 3.
And eventually decided to use a 7-day time-based system instead of the final game's 3 days. The internal clock was used to keep track of time,
but that would have been the bestest use of an internal clock ever.
Which is a pretty cool idea.
Of course, regardless of whether or not the title made use of the 64DD, that thing eventually fell into a dark abyss called obscurity/eBay for a ridiculous amount of money.
Sadly, the 64 disk drive died and was buried on eBay.
And the new Zelda title would see a cartridge release instead.
So Zelda Gaiden was remade in cartridge form.
With a new name, Majora's Mask. The reasoning behind changing the name was to, quote, reinvent the game.
Somewhere in the middle of development, Zelda Gaiden was renamed Majora's Mask to, quote-unquote, reinvent the game.
And so, now we move on to the beta of Majora's Mask, and there's a lot of little differences between the various early versions of Majora's Mask compared to its final release.
As with almost every beta, there's a lot of little differences between this version of Majora's Mask and the final version.
The first thing I have to bring up is that in an early screenshot, you can see Skull Kid and the moon. But the moon isn't trying to haunt my dreams. Yes, the moon is lacking its awful, terrifying, child-crushing face.
As seen in this early concept art, the moon doesn't have its normal hope-crushing, childhood-scarring face.
But I have to say, as much as I hated the moon's evil, stupid face, it really doesn't scream, hey guys, I'm a threat and I'm gonna kill you in 3 days, without the face.
Though without it, it doesn't really look as menacing, so I guess it's a good thing they added it?
As you can see by the early footage and some early pics, quite a few areas look very different and some aren't even in the final product. Stone Tower's layout in particular is very different.
As seen from this early gameplay footage, the layout of stages are different than the final version, such as the Stone Tower here.
And some walls have, let's say, interesting design choices. Nothing I would choose.
The textures in the beta also had more of an Alice in Wonderland feel to them.
Early on in development, there was going to be a fishing minigame to earn rupees.
Originally, Majora's Mask was going to include a fishing minigame called Jabu Jabu Fishing.
And at some other stage development, there's a quote from Miyamoto saying, "You will be able to buy time using rupees. There will be a merchant who sells time."
Miyamoto also said that there would be a merchant who sold time for rubies.
Now this is interesting. because I'd buy some time. It would certainly make me a lot less paranoid, and I could really use some help with that, Nintendo.
Now I'm kinda sad that they cut this out of the game. Sure would've come in handy with me not being paranoid every time I launched the game.
There's also this little wallet thing that may be a beta version of your wallet or a quest item.
This wallet is also an unused object. It looks nothing like an adult or giant wallet. This could mean it was maybe a quest item or a very early wallet.
Your guess is as good as mine.
I don't know. No one knows. But you can have an opinion, that's fine.
Of course, the coolest thing I saw in all this stuff was the Adult's Mask, which was replaced with the Fierce Deity's Mask in the final version.
Perhaps one of the biggest scrapped items was the Adult Link Mask.
This mask would essentially serve the purpose of allowing you to change into Adult Link.
This mask served the purpose of changing Link into Adult Link whenever the mask was worn.
This idea was scrapped because it was ultimately deemed a little pointless.
The mask was removed because it was considered pointless.
Because, unlike in Ocarina of Time where young Link wouldn't be able to use, let's say, a bow for example.
Unlike in Ocarina of Time where young Link couldn't hold a bow for example.
But he can use that bow in Majora's Mask.
Because young Link could hold all items.
But that's all I have to say about the beta of Majora's Mask.
So that's the beta of Majora's Mask.
In any case, most of the changes made from the beta to final release are minimal, and the finished product is nothing short of sexy.
But the changes between the beta and the final are minimal, and the final is still an awesome game.